The Virgin Queen wasn't just hiding her age, she was hiding a secret that could destroy everything she worked for. Beneath her royal gowns, Elizabeth concealed something far darker: masculine body hair on her chest. For decades, she went to extreme lengths to keep this secret hidden, and anyone who saw through her illusion paid the price. The one man who dared to speak of it, he paid the ultimate price. Stick around, because the truth about Elizabeth's hidden body, locked away for 400 years, will shock you. Picture this. September 28, 1599, 10 in the morning. Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, crashes through the doors of Elizabeth's bedchamber at Nonsuch Palace, covered in mud and sweat from riding 300 miles without rest. His horse is foaming at the mouth, half dead from the brutal pace Essex has maintained for days. He's desperate, panicked, knowing his enemies at court are poisoning the Queen against him after his disastrous military campaign in Ireland. Robert Cecil, the hunchbacked spy master who despises Essex, has been sending detailed letters to Elizabeth, describing every failure, every broken promise, every unauthorized decision that makes Essex look incompetent and treasonous. Essex has gambled everything on this moment, on throwing himself at Elizabeth's mercy before anyone can stop him. He storms through the palace entrance, his boots tracking mud across pristine marble floors that servants spend hours polishing. Courtiers scatter in confusion as this wild-eyed earl barges past them without acknowledgement. He pushes through the presence chamber where nobles are waiting for scheduled audiences, ignoring their shocked stares and whispered speculations. He crashes through the privy chamber where officials try to block his path, but they hesitate just long enough for him to slip past. Guards at the final door to Elizabeth's private apartments reach for their weapons, uncertain whether they should physically restrain the Queen's favorite. And then Essex bursts through that final barrier into Elizabeth I's bedchamber, completely unannounced, without permission at 10 in the morning. He freezes. There, standing by her dressing table in nothing but a simple robe over her nightdress, is Elizabeth. But this isn't the glorious queen anyone at court has ever seen. This is the real Elizabeth, caught completely unprepared without her costume. Essex stares, his mouth slightly open, his eyes widening in disbelief at what he's witnessing. Because what he sees in that moment will haunt him for the rest of his very short life. Elizabeth stands there, her face bare of the thick white makeup she's worn in public for nearly 40 years. Without the Venetian ceruse creating that porcelain mask, Essex can see every scar from the smallpox that nearly killed her in 1562. The pockmarks that crater her cheeks like tiny craters, the wrinkled papery skin that years of toxic, lead-based cosmetics have turned gray and deteriorated. Her face looks older than her 66 years, damaged by decades of poisonous makeup absorbed through her skin. Her lips without their crimson paint are thin, pale, almost colorless. The deep lines around her mouth and eyes that the white paste usually conceals are starkly visible, making her look gaunt and aged. Her head is uncovered, revealing not the towering red wig decorated with jewels and pearls that everyone recognizes as the Virgin Queen's signature, but the devastating reality beneath it. Thin wisps of gray hair hanging limply around her ears. That's it. Most of her scalp is completely bald and exposed, the skin pale and visible through the few remaining strands. But that's not what makes Essex's face drain of color completely. As Elizabeth turns sharply in shock at the intrusion, her loosely tied robe falls partially open for just a few seconds. The silk fabric slips from her shoulder, exposing her chest before she can clutch it closed. And there, visible in that brief moment of exposure, Essex sees something that defies everything he understands about the female form, about his queen, about nature itself. Dark, coarse hair covering her chest. Not the delicate, barely visible hair that some women have, but thick, masculine hair that spreads across her sternum in a dense pattern and continues down toward her stomach. The kind of body hair that only men develop, triggered by male hormones. The kind of hair that shouldn't exist on any woman, let alone the Queen of England, the Virgin Queen, the symbol of England's power and glory. Essex stands frozen in the doorway, unable to look away, unable to process what his eyes are showing him, unable to reconcile this shocking reality with the magnificent image he's known for 10 years. For a moment that stretches into eternity, Essex and Elizabeth lock eyes across the chamber. The morning light streams through the windows, illuminating every detail of this catastrophic encounter. She sees the shock in his expression transforming into something worse. Recognition, understanding, maybe even disgust or pity. He sees naked fear flash across her face, a vulnerability he's never witnessed in the powerful monarch who has ruled England for 41 years. Before she composes herself with the iron will that has kept her on the throne through countless crises, Essex catches a glimpse of the terrified woman beneath the crown. She's been caught. The mask has been literally ripped away. Her most carefully guarded secret, protected with absolute ruthlessness for 45 years, has just been exposed to one of the most politically connected, most reckless, most indiscreet men in England. For decades, she's controlled exactly who sees her and when and under what circumstances with military precision. She's maintained absolute power over her image, over access to her person, over every moment when she appears before another human being. And in one moment of carelessness, of assuming she was safe in her own bedchamber at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, that control has been shattered completely. The silence stretches for what feels like an eternity, but is probably only 5 or 6 seconds. Essex's mouth is slightly open, his eyes wide and unblinking, his expression a mixture of shock and something that might be pity or horror or fascinated revulsion. His brain is trying to process the impossible thing he's just witnessed. Elizabeth recovers first because she always recovers first. She survived 41 years on a throne that everyone said a woman couldn't hold. She survived assassination plots, religious uprisings, invasion threats, and constant pressure to marry and surrender her power. And she's not about to show weakness now, even caught without her wig and exposed robe in front of the man she once favored above all others. Within seconds, her face transforms from shocked fear to composed royal authority, as if she's physically pulling on the mask of monarchy to replace the costume that's been torn away. She greets Essex calmly, almost warmly, as if nothing unusual has happened, as if he hasn't just witnessed something that could destroy her reign. Her voice is steady and controlled as she asks about his journey from Ireland, the roads he traveled, whether his horse survived the brutal pace. She listens to his frantic explanations about the military campaign, nodding sympathetically at his complaints about his enemies at court who are undermining him with their letters and whispered accusations. She plays the understanding monarch perfectly, the gracious queen willing to hear out her loyal servant despite his breach of protocol. Her hands remain steady as she adjusts her robe, ensuring nothing else can be seen. Her face betrays nothing of the cold calculation racing through her mind. Essex, still in shock from what he's just witnessed, stumbles through his explanations about Ireland. His words come out jumbled and desperate as he tries to justify the unauthorized truce he negotiated, the failures of his campaign, his decision to abandon his post and race back to England. He keeps glancing at her bald head, then forcing himself to look away, then glancing back because he can't quite believe what he's seeing. His eyes drift to her chest, now safely covered by the clutched robe, as if trying to confirm that what he saw was real and not some fever dream from his exhausting journey. Elizabeth acts as if she doesn't notice his disturbed glances. She tells him sweetly that she'll consider his explanations carefully, that he should clean himself up from his muddy journey, rest and recover, and they'll discuss Ireland properly later when he's had time to compose himself. Essex backs out of the room, bowing repeatedly, still stammering his thanks for her patience and mercy. The door closes behind him. Elizabeth stands alone in her chamber for a long moment, and anyone watching her face would have seen the carefully maintained calm crack for just an instant, replaced by cold, calculating fury that makes her eyes go dark. Essex has seen her. Really seen her. The one thing she spent 40 years and countless lives preventing has just happened. And as the day progresses, Elizabeth's demeanor toward Essex changes in ways that everyone at court notices but nobody quite understands. The warm reception of that morning evaporates like morning mist under the harsh sun. By afternoon, Essex finds himself denied access to the Queen's presence, despite repeated requests for audience. By evening, he's under house arrest in his apartments, with guards posted at his door and strict orders that he's to speak with no one without permission. Officially, the reason given to the court is his unauthorized return from Ireland, his abandonment of his military post, his negotiation of a truce with Irish rebels without seeking the Queen's approval first. All valid charges, all true, all worthy of serious punishment under the strict military protocols of Tudor England. But the speed of Elizabeth's turn against him, the coldness that replaces what had been years of obvious favoritism and indulgence, suggests that something far more personal is at play. Courtiers who witnessed Elizabeth's treatment of Essex over the years know that she's forgiven him for worse offenses before. She overlooked his reckless behavior, his temper tantrums, his public disrespect that would have gotten other men executed. She'd defended him against counselors who called him dangerous and unstable. But now, within hours of that bedroom encounter, all that protection has vanished. Essex, confined to his apartments with only his closest servants allowed to attend him, makes the catastrophic mistake of not staying silent about what he saw. He can't help himself. The shock of discovery is too profound, the contrast too stark. the secret too explosive to keep bottled up inside. The image of that bald elderly woman with masculine body hair standing in her bedchamber is so radically different from the magnificent queen everyone sees in public that it's almost absurd. During the weeks of his house arrest, as friends and supporters visit him with smuggled messages and sympathy, Essex begins talking. He jokes about it to his friends, his voice taking on a mocking edge born of shock and vindictive hurt. He describes Elizabeth's appearance in terms that betray not just disloyalty, but cruel contempt and mockery. He tells people about her crooked carcass, painting a picture of a decrepit old woman bearing no resemblance to the glorious Gloriana of portraits and public appearances. He describes the wispy gray hair hanging limply around her bald scalp, making her sound more like a dying peasant than a powerful monarch. He talks about how old and diminished she looked without her costume, how the mighty Virgin Queen is actually a pathetic elderly woman hiding beneath wigs and makeup. And then he goes further, crossing a line that will ultimately cost him his head. He describes the hair on her chest, the thick masculine body hair that he glimpsed when her robe fell open. He makes jokes about the Virgin Queen's secret deformity, about the Queen being more man than woman beneath those elaborate gowns, about the physical impossibility of what he witnessed. His friends laugh nervously at the gossip, unsure whether to believe such a wild claim, but fascinated by the scandal of it. Some of them press for more details, asking questions that Essex answers with increasingly graphic descriptions. He's too angry, too humiliated by his house arrest, too convinced of his own importance to consider the consequences of his words. The gossip spreads through Essex's circle of supporters like wildfire through dry grass. Within days, dozens of people have heard some version of the story about what Essex saw in the Queen's bedchamber that morning. And of course, inevitably, because the Tudor court is riddled with spies and informants eager to curry favor by reporting any scandal or disloyalty, the words get back to Elizabeth. Robert Cecil, Essex's greatest enemy, personally delivers the reports to the Queen, his face carefully neutral as he recounts the mocking descriptions Essex has been sharing. When Elizabeth hears what Essex has been saying about her appearance, about the secret she's protected with absolute ruthlessness and multiple murders over 4 decades, something inside her turns ice cold and final. This isn't just political betrayal or military incompetence. This is deeply, unforgivably personal. Essex saw her vulnerable, saw her real, saw the aging woman with the impossible body beneath the constructed image of eternal, powerful monarchy that she's spent half a century building and maintaining at enormous cost. And then he laughed about it. He mocked her. He shared the secret with others, turning her deepest shame into entertainment for his friends. He betrayed not just his queen in a political sense, but the woman who had genuinely cared for him, who had favored him above other courtiers despite his constant mistakes and bad judgment, who had defended him against counselors who called him dangerous, who had perhaps even loved him in her own complicated way. The man who saw past her mask, who witnessed the truth she'd killed to protect, chose to ridicule what he found there. He chose to make her humanity, her physical reality, her secret shame into a joke for the amusement of courtiers. For Elizabeth, this was unforgivable. She'd executed people before for political reasons, for genuine plots against her life, for Catholic conspiracies that threatened her throne. She'd sent nobles to the scaffold for treason, for rebellion, for refusing to accept her religious settlement. But Essex's ultimate punishment would feel different to those who understood what had really happened. More personal, more about protecting the image she'd created than protecting the kingdom itself. Essex would never see Elizabeth privately again. Every request for an audience is denied without explanation. Every letter he writes, pleading for a chance to explain himself, to apologize, to beg forgiveness, goes unanswered and unacknowledged. The Queen, who once read his letters multiple times and composed lengthy responses, now won't even break the seal on his desperate pleas. He's released from house arrest eventually, after political pressure from his supporters, and because keeping him confined without formal charges was becoming politically complicated. But Essex finds himself frozen out of court favor completely, exiled from the presence chamber where he once stood at the Queen's right hand. The warmth Elizabeth once showed him, the obvious affection that made other courtiers jealous and resentful, has vanished completely. It's been replaced by an icy silence that's somehow more frightening than open anger would be. Essex, desperate and financially ruined by his expensive military campaign that produced no results, spirals into increasingly erratic and self-destructive behavior. He gathers armed supporters at his London mansion, surrounding himself with discontented nobles and military men who share his grievances against the government. He makes wild public accusations against Robert Cecil and other counselors, claiming they're manipulating the aging queen against him, poisoning her mind with lies and distortions. He rants about how he should be leading the Privy Council, how England needs his military genius, how the Queen's advisors are destroying the kingdom with their cautious policies. His behavior becomes so unstable that even his supporters start questioning his judgment. On February 8, 1601, just 17 months after bursting into Elizabeth's bedchamber and witnessing her secret, Robert Devereux makes his final fatal mistake. He leads 300 armed supporters in what amounts to open rebellion, marching through London's streets in a desperate attempt to force his way back into royal favor. His plan is incoherent and doomed from the start. He thinks London's citizens will rally to his cause when they see him marching with armed men, that they'll rise up against the evil counselors he claims are controlling the Queen. He believes his popularity and military reputation will carry the day, that Elizabeth will be forced to restore him to favor when she sees the support he commands. The rebellion is a complete failure from the first moment. London's citizens don't join him. They close their doors and windows, watching the armed procession pass with suspicion and fear rather than enthusiasm. The city gates are shut against him by order of the Lord Mayor. Royal forces surround his group, cutting off any escape routes. By nightfall, Essex is trapped in his own mansion, surrounded by hundreds of the Queen's soldiers. By the next morning, he's arrested and taken to the Tower of London, the same fortress where Anne Boleyn lost her head 65 years earlier. The trial for treason is swift and inevitable, a mere formality given the evidence of his armed march through the capital. Essex is found guilty on all charges. The sentence is execution by beheading, the traditional punishment for nobles convicted of treason against the crown. On February 25, 1601, Robert Devereux, the second Earl of Essex, formerly the Queen's favorite and once considered the most powerful young man in England, is led to the executioner's block on Tower Green. He's only 33 years old, his life cut brutally short by his own recklessness and inability to keep silent about what he witnessed. He makes a final speech before the assembled witnesses, accepting responsibility for his rebellion and asking God's forgiveness for his sins against his sovereign. His voice is steady despite the terror he must feel, maintaining the dignity expected of a nobleman facing execution. He kneels at the block, positioning his neck on the worn wood where so many others have died. The executioner raises his axe high. The blade falls. But the executioner's aim is slightly off, or his strength fails, or the axe isn't as sharp as it should be. The first stroke doesn't sever Essex's head cleanly. The blade bites deep into his neck but doesn't complete the job. Essex's body jerks in agony. Blood sprays across the scaffold. The executioner raises the axe again, bringing it down a second time. Still, the head doesn't separate completely. It takes 3 strokes total, 3 separate blows of the axe before Essex's head finally rolls free from his body. The witnesses watch in horror as the botched execution turns into a gruesome spectacle. When Elizabeth is informed of the execution and told about how it took 3 strokes to complete, witnesses report that she shows no emotion at all. No tears, no regret, no sign that she's just ordered the death of a man she once favored so obviously that the entire court gossiped about their relationship. She simply nods once, acknowledging the information, and returns to her paperwork as if the matter is of no more importance than approving a minor trade agreement. Her face remains completely neutral, betraying nothing of whatever she might be feeling internally. But here's the question that has haunted historians and Tudor scholars for over 400 years. Did Essex really die for treason and rebellion? Or did he die for something far more personal and unforgivable? Officially, according to the court records and the trial transcript, the execution was about his armed march through London, his gathering of supporters with weapons, his attempt to force his way back into royal favor through intimidation and threat of violence. All of that is carefully documented. All of that is genuinely treasonous under Tudor law. All of that legally merited death by execution. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. But the timing of Elizabeth's turn against him, the speed with which her favor evaporated, the personal fury that everyone at court witnessed but nobody fully understood, and the fact that she never forgave him despite years of previous devotion, all suggest something else was at play beneath the official narrative. Essex didn't just betray his queen in a political sense. He committed a far more personal violation. He saw her secret, the physical reality she'd spent 4 decades hiding, and then he mocked it. He stripped away the illusion that Elizabeth had spent 45 years constructing and maintaining at enormous personal cost, both financial and in human lives. He saw the bald head beneath the elaborate wig, the scarred, damaged face beneath the white makeup, the aging body beneath the costume of eternal majesty. And most unforgivably, he saw the masculine body hair covering her chest, the physical impossibility that proved her body was fundamentally different from other women's. Then he had the audacity, the breathtaking stupidity, to laugh about it, to share what he'd seen with others, making her secret into gossip and entertainment, to make jokes about her crooked carcass as if the most powerful woman in England was just a subject for his amusement and mockery. For Elizabeth, that was unforgivable in a way that political rebellion almost wasn't. She'd executed people before for political reasons, for genuine plots against her life that threatened her throne. She'd sent Catholic conspirators to gruesome deaths for planning her assassination. She'd ordered the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, after decades of documented plotting and treason. She'd hanged, drawn, and quartered priests who defied her religious settlement. But Essex's execution feels qualitatively different to anyone who understands what really happened that September morning. It's more visceral, more about protecting the image she'd created than protecting the kingdom from genuine political threats. Elizabeth's entire 45-year reign was built on maintaining an elaborate illusion that consumed every moment of her life. She was the Virgin Queen, married only to England, eternally youthful and powerful and available, but always just out of reach. She was Gloriana, the magnificent monarch who transcended the limitations of her gender through sheer force of will and divine right. She was the symbolic embodiment of England itself, unchanging and eternal despite the years passing and her body aging. The elaborate wigs that added a foot to her height, the white lead makeup that created a porcelain mask of eternal beauty, the structured gowns that stood away from her body like architectural achievements, the absolute control over who saw her and when and under what lighting conditions, all of it was designed to maintain that image at any cost. Essex shattered it in one unguarded moment on a September morning. He saw past the costume, past the mask, past the carefully constructed legend. He found an aging woman with a bald head, scarred skin, and masculine body hair that shouldn't exist. And he couldn't keep that revelation to himself. Perhaps that's the real reason his head had to roll. Not because he marched through London with armed supporters in a pathetically incompetent attempt at rebellion, but because he committed the ultimate crime against Elizabeth I. He saw her as she truly was, witnessed the physical secret that could have destroyed her reign if it became public knowledge, and then refused to stay silent about it. The execution wasn't just about punishing rebellion or maintaining political order. It was about eliminating the one person who knew the secret and had proven beyond any doubt that he couldn't be trusted to keep it, who had actively chosen to spread it as a malicious gossip. After Essex's death, Elizabeth lived 2 more years, finally dying in March 1603 at the age of 69 after refusing food and medicine for days. In those final 2 years, witnesses noted that she became even more obsessive about her appearance than ever before, even as her body was clearly failing as she grew weaker and her mind began to wander. As death approached with inevitable certainty, the wigs got even taller and more elaborate. The makeup got thicker, applied in heavier layers to cover the increasing deterioration of her skin. The control over access to her person got more absolute, more paranoid, more violently enforced. She was holding on to the illusion with everything she had left, every ounce of strength remaining in her dying body. She knew that the moment she died, that illusion would end forever. The costume would be removed. Her body would be prepared for burial. And unless she took extreme measures, the secret would finally be exposed to the world. Knowing that death was approaching, Elizabeth took one last desperate measure to protect her secret beyond the grave. She explicitly ordered in her final instructions that no one was to examine her body after death. No autopsy, no medical examination, no documentation of any kind. Her body was to be prepared for burial only by her 3 most trusted ladies, the same women who had dressed her every morning for decades, who already knew her secret and had proven their silence. Within hours of her death, before rigor mortis could even set in, Elizabeth's corpse was sealed in a lead coffin that was immediately soldered shut. No one outside her innermost circle was permitted to see what the removal of her costume revealed. The servants who prepared her body, who washed the corpse and saw everything beneath the clothes, were immediately scattered across England to remote estates. They were given generous pensions that would support them for life, but also received terrifying explicit threats about what would happen if they ever spoke about what they had witnessed. Some were sent to northern estates so remote they might as well have been exiled to another country. Others disappeared from historical records entirely, their fates unknown. High-ranking nobles who demanded access to witness her death in preparation, as was traditional for royal deaths, were turned away by armed guards. The guards had explicit orders from the Privy Council, issued even before Elizabeth's death, that no one was to enter her death chamber. The physicians who attended her final illness, who might have seen her body or conducted examinations, died mysteriously within a year. All three of them. Sudden fevers, unexpected ailments, deaths that seemed statistically impossible for relatively young men in good health. And her tomb at Westminster Abbey has remained sealed for over 400 years, denied every request for examination, even with modern technology that could scan through the coffin without opening it. Historians have requested permission multiple times to use ground-penetrating radar or other non-invasive technologies that could reveal what's inside that lead coffin without disturbing the remains. Every request has been denied by the church authorities and the royal family. The official reason given is respect for the dead and the sanctity of the tomb. But the level of resistance, the absolute refusal to allow any examination whatsoever, suggests there's still something being protected after 4 centuries. What are they still protecting? What secret lies in that sealed coffin that the British establishment has guarded so zealously for 400 years? What could possibly matter enough to deny scientific inquiry and historical investigation? The answer is probably simpler and sadder than conspiracy theories about gender switching or mysterious rare diseases or supernatural explanations. Elizabeth was different. Her body, damaged by childhood poisoning and hormonal disruption, developed in ways that defied Tudor understanding of gender and biology. She grew masculine body hair that no woman should have, thick, coarse hair covering her chest and abdomen that she desperately tried to remove with toxic treatments that only made everything worse. She lost most of her scalp hair to smallpox at age 29 and spent the next 41 years hiding that baldness because, in Tudor England, hair was a crucial marker of femininity, youth, and vitality. A bald woman was considered unnatural, possibly cursed by God, certainly unfit to inspire the loyalty and devotion that a monarch required to maintain power. Elizabeth understood better than anyone that her power rested partly on her image, that the Virgin Queen needed to look eternally youthful and magnificent to maintain the mystique that kept her kingdom stable through religious turmoil and foreign threats. So she constructed an elaborate illusion using wigs and toxic makeup and clothing that created a barrier between her body and the world. And she protected that illusion with ruthless determination that included murder when necessary. Anyone who saw too much, anyone who couldn't be trusted to stay silent, anyone who mocked what they discovered or threatened to expose it, paid the ultimate price. Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, learned that lesson the hardest way possible. He saw the real Elizabeth, the woman beneath the costume, and he made the fatal mistake of thinking he could joke about it without consequences. 17 months later, his head was on a chopping block, severed from his body after 3 brutal strokes of the executioner's axe. The secret that Elizabeth protected with such violence and paranoia wasn't about treachery or political conspiracy or mysterious medical conditions that modern doctors could explain. It was about vanity and power, and the terrible burden of maintaining an image that everyone believes in but nobody is allowed to see behind. It was about a woman whose body betrayed her in the most visible, most shameful way possible in her culture, and who spent 45 years ensuring that betrayal remained hidden, no matter the cost in lives or gold or personal happiness. She couldn't marry because a husband would discover the truth. She couldn't have close physical relationships because intimacy would reveal her secret. She couldn't allow physicians to examine her thoroughly because they would document what they found. She lived in a prison of her own making, constructed from wigs and makeup and structured clothing and absolute control, maintained through fear and violence. And when she died, she made sure that secret would be buried with her, sealed in lead, protected by centuries of tradition and official denials and institutional resistance to inquiry. The tomb remains closed to this day. The illusion remains intact despite 4 centuries of historical investigation. And Elizabeth's secret, purchased at the cost of toxic makeup that poisoned her slowly in Robert Devereux's life, along with dozens of others who saw too much, stays hidden in Westminster Abbey where no one can expose the truth about the Virgin Queen's masculine body hair and bald head. But let's go back further to understand how this tragedy began. Back before Elizabeth was queen, before she learned to hide her body so completely. Back to her childhood when the poisoning that would change everything was still destroying her mother. Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth's mother, was the most hated woman in England in 1536. She'd displaced Catherine of Aragon, caused England to break from the Catholic Church, failed to produce a male heir, and made powerful enemies who wanted her destroyed. Thomas Cromwell, Henry VIII's chief minister, orchestrated her downfall with methodical precision. But historical records suggest the campaign against Anne went beyond political maneuvering into something far more sinister. Court physicians noted that Anne Boleyn suffered increasingly severe symptoms in the months before her arrest. Violent mood swings that seemed to come from nowhere, screaming fits followed by days of silent depression. Physical illness that left her vomiting and weak despite having no clear medical cause. Wild accusations against people at court, paranoid claims that everyone was conspiring against her. Henry VIII used these behaviors as evidence that Anne was unstable, possibly possessed, certainly unfit to be queen. Modern historians have suggested these symptoms match heavy metal poisoning, specifically the gradual administration of arsenic and mercury compounds. Small doses, carefully measured, delivered through her food over months. Not enough to kill quickly, but enough to make her appear insane and justify her execution. The kitchens at Hampton Court and the Tower served food prepared by cooks who reported to Cromwell. Anne's personal servants, the people who brought her meals, were carefully selected for their loyalty to the anti-Boleyn faction. And 3-year-old Elizabeth ate from the same kitchens. Whether Elizabeth was an unintended victim or whether Cromwell hoped to eliminate Henry's disappointing daughter, along with his unwanted wife, remains a historical mystery. But the evidence suggests that young Elizabeth was exposed to the same poisons killing her mother. Court records mention that Princess Elizabeth suffered alarming symptoms during this period that physicians couldn't explain. She would wake screaming from nightmares, her small body drenched in sweat and burning with fever despite having no signs of actual illness. She refused to eat for days, claiming the food tasted wrong, that it made her mouth feel strange. When she did eat, she would sometimes vomit hours later with no apparent cause. Her governess noted personality changes that seemed extreme even for a traumatized 3-year-old. Elizabeth would be calm one moment and then explode into screaming rage the next, throwing things and attacking her ladies with a violence that seemed to come from nowhere. Her skin would flush red and burn hot to the touch, then turn pale and cold within hours. These symptoms would come and go in cycles that matched the timing of Anne Boleyn's worst episodes, suggesting they were both being exposed to the same toxic substances. The poison that killed Anne Boleyn within months had years to work its damage on Elizabeth's small, developing body, and the timing was catastrophic. At age 3, Elizabeth's endocrine system was beginning the long process of sexual development that would continue through puberty. The hormones that determine physical characteristics, that shape bodies as male or female, that control hair growth and breast development and menstruation, were just starting to activate. The heavy metals and toxic compounds Elizabeth consumed disrupted that delicate hormonal balance at the worst possible moment. Arsenic and mercury don't just poison randomly. They interfere with specific biological processes, including hormone production and regulation. Modern medical research has shown that heavy metal poisoning during early childhood can cause permanent endocrine disruption, affecting sexual development in ways that don't become apparent until puberty. Elizabeth survived the poisoning that killed her mother, but the damage was done. As she grew from child to teenager, the consequences of that early exposure began manifesting in ways that terrified her governess and forced Elizabeth to begin hiding her body even before she fully understood what was wrong. At age 12, when other girls her age were beginning menstruation and developing secondary sexual characteristics, Elizabeth showed no signs of normal female development. Her chest remained flat while other noblewomen's daughters were developing breasts. Her hips stayed narrow instead of widening in the typical female pattern. Her voice, instead of staying high and girlish, began deepening to a richer, almost masculine tone that made people comment on how commanding she sounded. And then came the body hair. At 14, Elizabeth began growing thick, dark hair in places where girls shouldn't have hair. Her chest, her abdomen spreading in patterns that matched male body hair distribution. She tried to hide it under layers of clothing, wearing multiple chemises even in summer heat. She refused to let anyone help her bathe, insisting on privacy that seemed excessive even by Tudor standards of modesty. Her ladies whispered among themselves about the princess's strange behavior, but nobody understood the real reason behind her obsessive concealment. By age 16, Elizabeth's body had betrayed her completely. She still hadn't menstruated, something her governess began documenting with increasing alarm because regular menstruation was considered proof of female health and fertility. The masculine body hair continued spreading despite Elizabeth's desperate attempts to remove it with painful treatments involving harsh, caustic substances. Her voice had settled into a deeper register that was unusual for a young woman, giving her a commanding presence that would later serve her well as queen, but marked her as different from other girls. Her shoulders had broadened more than typical female development, requiring her dresses to be specially tailored to accommodate her frame. And worst of all, she began experiencing strange symptoms that modern doctors might recognize as hormonal imbalance, but Tudor physicians couldn't explain. Violent mood swings, bursts of energy followed by days of exhaustion, skin problems that came and went without apparent cause. Elizabeth was trapped in a body that didn't match either male or female norms, damaged by childhood poisoning in ways she couldn't explain to anyone. And she knew even at 16 that this difference made her vulnerable. In Tudor England, physical abnormality was seen as evidence of God's displeasure or demonic influence. A woman with masculine characteristics might be accused of witchcraft, might be declared unfit for marriage or inheritance, might be locked away or worse. Elizabeth's only hope was concealment. Absolute total concealment of her body from everyone except a tiny circle of trusted attendants who could be controlled through fear and loyalty. This is when she began developing the defensive strategies that would define her life. The layers of clothing, the obsessive privacy, the violent reactions to anyone who tried to see her body without permission. When Kat Ashley walked in on 17-year-old Elizabeth bathing and saw the full extent of her body's difference, it was the moment Elizabeth had been dreading for years. The look of horror on Kat's face confirmed Elizabeth's worst fears. Her body wasn't just slightly different. It was shockingly, undeniably abnormal in ways that would destroy her if anyone outside her immediate household discovered the truth. Elizabeth made Kat swear that blood oath on the Bible invoking God's wrath and eternal damnation to bind her governess's silence. But she also knew that oaths might not be enough. Fear would be necessary. Violence might be required. When Kat died 2 years later from sudden fever, right after she'd started drinking heavily and muttering in her sleep about the princess's curse, Elizabeth learned the lesson that would guide her for the next 50 years. Secrets this dangerous require permanent solutions. Witnesses who can't be trusted must be eliminated. At 18 years old, Elizabeth had already accepted that protecting her secret might require murder. And when she became queen at 25, she had the power to make those murders look like natural deaths, like accidents, like anything except the systematic elimination of people who knew too much. The pattern would repeat throughout her reign whenever anyone got too close to discovering what she was hiding beneath the costumes and makeup. Physicians who examined her too thoroughly would die within months of mysterious sudden fevers. Servants who might have glimpsed her body during illnesses would disappear or be scattered to remote estates, with generous pensions and terrifying threats. Ladies-in-waiting who seemed too curious would find themselves dismissed from court and sent to live in distant counties where they couldn't spread rumors. Even her potential lovers, the men who came closest to the physical intimacy that would have exposed her secret, had to be carefully managed. Robert Dudley was the great love of Elizabeth's life, but that relationship was doomed the moment his hand discovered the unexpected texture of masculine body hair beneath her bodice during that summer afternoon in 1562. Dudley handled the discovery with discretion and loyalty that probably saved his life, but Elizabeth could never truly trust him again. The intimacy they'd shared was replaced by careful formality, the passion cooled by her knowledge that he'd seen her secret and could never unsee it. When Dudley married Lettice Knollys in 1578, Elizabeth's jealous rage was legendary. She banned Lettice from court, refused to speak Dudley's name for months, and made his life miserable with her obvious displeasure. But beneath the theatrical jealousy was something deeper. Relief, perhaps, that Dudley had moved on, that he'd married someone else and would focus his attentions away from Elizabeth. Regret for the life and love she could never have because of her body's betrayal. When Dudley died in 1588, Elizabeth locked herself away for 3 days, grieving intensely in private. She kept his final letter to her in a locked box beside her bed for the remaining 15 years of her life, taking it out sometimes late at night when no one was watching and reading his words by candlelight. It was the closest she ever came to admitting vulnerability, to acknowledging that her secret had cost her not just physical intimacy, but emotional connection as well. She'd sacrificed love for power, humanity for image, choosing to protect her secret over experiencing the relationships that make life meaningful. And then came Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, who understood none of this history and learned none of these lessons. Essex was arrogant where Dudley had been careful, reckless where Dudley had been discreet, entitled where Dudley had been grateful for Elizabeth's favor. Essex genuinely believed his charm and military reputation made him untouchable, that Elizabeth's obvious affection gave him license to behave however he wanted without consequences. He was spectacularly wrong. When he burst into her bedchamber that September morning, he wasn't just violating protocol or showing poor judgment. He was stepping into a trap that had been set decades earlier, walking into a defensive system designed to destroy anyone who saw too much. The moment his eyes registered the shocking reality of Elizabeth's body, his fate was sealed as surely as if she'd signed his death warrant in that instant. Everything that followed, the house arrest, the gossip, the rebellion, the execution, was just the mechanism working as designed. Essex had seen the secret. Essex had proven he couldn't stay silent. Therefore, Essex had to die. The timeline was almost mechanical in its inevitability. 17 months from bedroom intrusion to severed head, a grace period that probably only existed because Essex had been such a favorite and because Elizabeth needed time to build the political justification for his execution. But the outcome was never in doubt. The moment Essex described her masculine body hair to his friends, making jokes about the Virgin Queen's hidden deformity, he signed his own death warrant. Elizabeth's response wasn't emotional or reactive. It was coldly calculated, methodical, the activation of defensive protocols she'd maintained for 40 years. Essex's execution on February 25, 1601 was theater, a public demonstration of what happens to people who betrayed the Queen's trust. The official charge was treason, rebellion, armed insurrection against the crown. All true, all documented, all legally sufficient to justify execution. But everyone close to the situation understood the real reason for Essex's death. He'd seen too much, spoken too freely, and violated the fundamental rule that kept Elizabeth's secret safe. Witnesses stay silent or witnesses die. The botched execution, requiring 3 strokes of the axe to sever Essex's head, was either unfortunate incompetence or deliberate cruelty. Some historians suggest the executioner was instructed to make Essex suffer, to turn his death into a gruesome spectacle that would warn others about the consequences of betraying Elizabeth. Others argue it was simply poor technique, a rushed execution with an inexperienced executioner or dull blade. Either way, the result was a death that everyone remembered, that was discussed in horrified whispers for years afterward. The young, handsome Earl of Essex, once the Queen's favorite, dying slowly on the scaffold while his head remained stubbornly attached despite multiple blows of the axe. Blood spraying across the wooden platform, his body jerking with each impact, the crowd watching in sick fascination as the execution went wrong. It was a death designed to be remembered, whether intentionally or not. And it worked. For the remaining 2 years of Elizabeth's life, no one dared speak carelessly about the Queen's appearance or body. No one joked about her wigs or makeup or elaborate costumes. The message was received and understood. See nothing, say nothing, or join Essex on the scaffold. In March 1603, Elizabeth I died after refusing food and medicine for weeks, essentially willing herself to death after 45 years of ruling England alone. Her final instructions were explicit and absolute. Her body was to be sealed immediately in a lead coffin with no examination, no documentation, no witnesses outside her 3 most trusted ladies. Those instructions were followed to the letter. Within hours of her death, before anyone could demand access or insist on the traditional viewing of the royal corpse, Elizabeth was locked away in lead and placed in Westminster Abbey, where she remains to this day. 400 years of requests for examination have been denied. Modern technology that could reveal what's inside the coffin without disturbing the remains has been refused permission. The official explanation is respect for the dead and preservation of historical sanctity. But the real reason is simpler. Elizabeth's secret is still being protected. The institutions of British power still guard the truth about the Virgin Queen's body, because revealing it, even 4 centuries later, would complicate the mythology that England has built around her. She's Gloriana, the magnificent queen, the woman who proved females could rule as successfully as males. Revealing that her body was physically different, that she had masculine characteristics that forced her into elaborate deception, might undermine that narrative. Better to leave the tomb sealed, the secret buried, the illusion intact. And that's exactly what Elizabeth would have wanted. She spent 45 years constructing that illusion at enormous cost. She sacrificed love, intimacy, honesty, and numerous lives to protect it. Why destroy it now just to satisfy historical curiosity? The secret died with her, and perhaps that's how it should remain. Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, died for violating that secret. His crime wasn't just rebellion or treason, it was seeing Elizabeth I as she really was and refusing to stay silent about it. And in Tudor England, under a queen who understood that power rests on image and image requires absolute control, that crime was unforgivable and punishable only by death. If this story revealed the dark secrets that history tried to bury forever, you need to subscribe to this channel right now. because we're uncovering the truths that got people executed, the scandals that changed everything, and the mysteries that powerful people spent centuries protecting with violence and lies. Hit that like button if you think Westminster Abbey should finally open Elizabeth's tomb after 400 years and let modern science examine what's really inside that sealed lead coffin. And drop your theory in the comments below. Do you think Essex deserved to die for mocking Elizabeth's secret? Or should she have shown mercy to the man who once held her favor? Your perspective might reveal something historians have been debating for centuries. The truth about what Elizabeth was really hiding is still sealed in that tomb, waiting to be discovered if anyone ever has the courage to look.